Hello, seventh graders. Good to see you. It is Saturday early evening. I'm going to get some reading done and get this posted. So you'll have two videos for the weekend. I don't know if any of you are going to see them. Whatever. We are at page 189. Leading up to this, Johnny had seen Scylla. Knew they had all gone out to Milton. The lights. Scylla and Isana were with them, but he would hang around the gates of Boston because he knew the lights were going to be harassed out in Milton by the Patriots. And so he expected him to be coming back. And they did. A lot of people who were pro British started coming back to Boston to find safety. And he was there one night when this wagon showed up, this carriage, and it turned out that's where Scylla was with the Lavinia Light and Isana. And Mr. Light was very sick. And so she wanted her father to be treated by Dr. Warren, whom Johnny knows. And she called him in. And Scylla had forgotten the silver. She was afraid the silver was going to be stolen out in Milton. So she decided to go back. Johnny is going to get a horse or a carriage from the doctor and go out there with her in order to get the silver so it doesn't stay in Milton to be stolen. Okay, so that's where we are on page 189. Okay, I'm going to, just leading up to it, the doctor's little white-haired mare flung herself forward. It would not take such a fast pace or long to get to Milton. Okay, and they both got a pass. He got a pass from the revolutionaries, and she got a pass for the British, so they should both be safe going out there. So Scylla and Johnny are now on their way out to the Light's house out in Milton. Although once or twice the light chase slurred, that would be a light carriage, that's what this is, slurred as it caught in great ruts made by the disabled light coach, there was no other sign of the late violence. The mob was utterly gone. It was not until they reached Roxbury that they knew the time. The village clock struck 2. Wow, that's 2 in the morning. Thus far they had not met one single human being. But here were a few turbulent fellows hanging about an inn door, and in Milton itself they were signaled to stop by a group whose faces they never did see. But Dr. Warren's chaise and horse were recognized. "Go ahead, Warren. Good luck, Warren." They went up the steep road from Milton. It was here Mr. Light had his country seat. Thus Johnny got out, struck tinder, and lighted the lantern he found in the chaise. He stood by the entrance gates. Yes, Scylla was right. They had smashed the arms carved upon the gates. The poor people of Milton had had enough of that rising eye. Johnny wasn't sure, but he had as well. They don't like the symbol of the lights because it just represents people they don't like, and Johnny's kind of tired of that rising eye also, because it's not been good for him. He walked ahead and Scylla drove the horse. Thus, half seen and in the dark, things did not look too bad. Scylla had a key to the back door which showed hatchet marks, but was not broken down. They went into the dining room, and from the lantern Scylla lit the candles in the 2 candelabra on the table, 20 candles in all, and the room filled with light. Fear had overcome the lights as they had sat down to eat. Bread broken and never eaten, the roast of beef with Yorkshire pudding sticking in the cold gravy, a bowl of salad still fresh, wine in the slender goblets. Already the great house did not seem to have been abandoned for a few hours, but for years. It was as if a witchcraft had been worked upon it. Johnny saw that Scylla had started to get the silver together. "Where's Mrs. Bessie?" "She left earlier than we did in a farm cart, but she'll be all right," because they know that the revolutionaries are going to protect her because she's one of them. Scylla went to work packing the silver, and she built up a little fire in the kitchen hearth so she might have hot water to wash the dishes. Neat by nature, she would leave the house tidy. Johnny took the lantern he had left on the kitchen table, and walked through the silent house. He could see that every window on the lower floor had been broken, but no one had entered. He went upstairs, Lavinia's room, and strewed about it things he had never seen before: stays, kerchiefs, patchboxes, ribbons, fripperies. It smelled faintly of lavender. He went to Mr. Light's room. The great four-poster soared to the ceiling. Four-poster bed, they got the big 4 posts, and oftentimes there'll be a canopy over the bed. A damask dressing gown, and Mr. Light's best wig on a wig rest. Off the big chamber and up one step down, and one step down, was a smaller room designed as a dressing room. Mr. Light seemingly had used this as an office. Here was his desk, and above it a painting of his favorite ship, the Unicorn. And here, judging by the tipped-over chair and the rumpled rugs, Mr. Light had had his all but fatal fit. It had caught him as he'd been packing his more important papers he wished no one to see. Johnny picked up what looked like a leather-bound book. It had been hollowed out, turned into a box. In a bookcase, no one would suspect it. He glanced at the papers within. Every one of them he saw, Sam Adams would be thankful to get. Every one of them he saw, Sam Adams would be thankful to get, okay? Then these he put in his pocket. Other books were scattered on the floor. Johnny picked up a heavy Bible, hoping that this too would prove to be a box. He put it on the desk and opened it. There were sheets of paper between the Old and New Testaments. Here a man might write his genealogy. That's often the case, people, that in Bibles, people would write at the beginning of the Bibles, there would be a genealogical page, who your families were, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and they would write that down very often in a Bible. So, Johnny's found a Bible here. What's it going to say? So, the first Jonathan Light had been born in Kent, that would be in England, in 16-something. He'd married a Matilda something, had come to Boston and had 4 sons and 3 daughters, and they, all 7, had sons and daughters, and so on. Now he was coming to the generations in which he might expect to find his own mother. Here indeed was Merchant Light himself and his daughter Lavinia, the 2 sons who had drowned in Guadalupe, the girls dead in infancy. So Merchant Light had lost several children. Both 2 sons had drowned in Guadalupe in Mexico. That's sad. The girls in infancy. He even found that Aunt Bert, who'd stayed on at Boston with her own servant, that very mean lady, he found one Lavinia Light after another. One married an Endicott and one an Otis. Neither was the right age for his mother. Scratched out in such a way that he had at first thought it was a mere decoration on the elaborately written page, there was another name. It was Lavinia Light. He held the lantern closer. Born 1740, married to Dr. Charles Latour, both of whom had died of plagues in Marseille shortly before his own birth. His mother had told him she'd been born in France and that his father had died before his own his father had died before his own birth. But why Dr. Charles Latour, and why had his mother's name been scratched off the family record? But nevertheless, this was the spot, the very spot where he might hang his own few meager leaves to the light tree. So there was a Lavinia, born in 1740, married Dr. Charles Latour. They both died of plague shortly before his birth. Okay. His mother told him he'd been born in France and his father had died before his own birth. Oh, okay. So, but they erased her name. Although in his daydreaming he'd often pictured himself a nephew, grandnephew, or even a grandson of Merchant Light, he had never once believed the relationship was that close. Now he checked over the generations. His grandfather, Roger Light, dead now for 20 years and builder of this very house, had been the younger brother of Jonathan Light. Johnny himself was the merchant's grandnephew. So that would mean Johnny's grandfather would be the brother to this Merchant Light. Interesting. So his grandfather and Merchant Light would be brothers. He took his knife from his pocket and cut the pages from the family Bible. Sometime they might be of use to him. Scylla was calling him. She wanted him to help her carry the heavy box and hampers of silver to the chase. On the sideboard, as yet unpacked, stood the 4 standing cups of the lights. Which one is yours, Johnny? He looked them over carefully. Only a silversmith could have told them apart. The base of the one had been ever so little bent and straightened again. This is my cup. Take it now. No. He set it down and turned restlessly to Scylla. He could not say to anyone what went through his mind, not to Scylla, not even to himself. He acted and spoke blindly. It's no good to me. We've moved on to other things. But it isn't stealing to take back what Mr. Light stole from you. I don't want it. What? No, I'm better off without it. I want nothing of them, neither their blood nor their silver. I'll carry that hamper for you, Syl. Mr. Light can have the old cup. But your mother. She didn't like it either. He came back when he had left the hamper and stopped by the kitchen hearth. Scylla had built up a little fire of faggots to heat water. He put his 2 hands on the mantelpiece and his forehead in his hands. He stood like that a long time. His grandfather had built this great house. His mother had played on the floor of this kitchen. Was it here his father had come, his father, the French doctor? Dr. Latour, the Bible had it. Here was mystery surely. Why not Dr. Tremain? And why had the Bible said both he and Lavinia Light had died of plague in Marseille, 1758, 3 months before he himself had been born? Does it matter? Does it, or doesn't it? No, he answered his own questions aloud and took from his pocket the heavy pages he'd cut from the Bible, all written over with the names of his genealogy. He could not think now why he had ever cut them out. Slowly tearing each sheet to ribbons, he fed them to the fire upon the hearth. "Oh, Johnny, I wish you hadn't done that." "Ah, I'd keep those pages." Then Scylla was asking him to close and fasten all the heavy shutters throughout the house. This would protect the interior a little in spite of broken window panes. His footsteps echoed through the vast, silent reaches of the house. One after another the heavy shutters slammed to, and he bolted them. A protest of unused hinges, and then a bang, and he went on to the next. The echo of his own footsteps. "My grandfather built this house. My mother knew it and loved it. My father dead before ever I was born." Now, for as long as it stood, this would be a haunted house. He felt the ghosts waiting in darkness until he and Scylla were gone before they stepped forth to take possession. Merchant Light, soon enough he would be back here. Miss Lavinia, she might live to be 100, but the time would come when, wilt or not, she must return to this house, this haunted house with its thin wreath of wraiths and his mother's among them. He had seen her face, heard her voice so clearly that night he had lain by her grave on the copse hill. He thought of her with love and a tender understanding, an understanding he had been too young to give when she had died. But he left the haunted chambers, echoing halls, and went gladly to the kitchen where Scylla was. For the dead should not look at the living, nor the living too long upon the dead. Scylla, unaware of his emotions, looked about her with satisfaction. She'd finished her work. Now we'll be in good order when the lights come back. Johnny felt sad. He went to her and put his arms about her and his thin cheek against her hair. "Scylla, they won't ever come back." "Never?" "No, this is the end. The end of one thing, the beginning of something else. They won't come back because this is going to be a war. There's going to be a war, a civil war, and we'll win. First folk like them will get routed out of Milton, then out of Boston, and the cards are going to be reshuffled, dealt again. Shall I shutter the kitchen too?" "Yes." Each time a shutter groaned, protested, and then came to with a bang. It seemed to say, "This is the end." And the words echoed through the house. "This is the end. This is the end." My mother played on the floor of this kitchen. My grandfather was but a young man when he built this house, and I, a grandson, have better right to it doubtless than an elder brother. The house was still filled with midnight and ghosts, but as they closed and locked the heavy kitchen door behind them, they saw it was close. It was close upon dawn. So they'd been there all night. Interesting. "It's like a funeral," Scylla whispered, "only worse." So he knew that much of what he knew that much of what he had been feeling. Scylla had also felt that. So he knew that much of what he had been feeling, Scylla had also felt. Along down Old County Road, marching through the meager half-light of the new day, came a company of minutemen, up and out early, drilling for coming battles before it was yet the hour to get to their chores. Left, right, left, right, left. They did not march too well. A boy no bigger than Dusty Miller had put a fife to his lips and was trying to blow it. He made awkward little tootles. The men marched on past the defaced gates of the Lights country seat, never turning to look at them or Dr. Warren's chaise with Scylla and Johnny under the hood. Oh, God help them, thought Johnny. They haven't seen those British troops in Boston. I have. They haven't seen the gold lace on the generals, those muskets. all so alike, and everyone has a bayonet. They haven't seen. The chase overtook and passed the marching farmers. Chapter 3, or Part 3. The musket which Rab did not have bothered Johnny, because he thought Rab should have a good gun. However, the soldiers never carried them while loitering about alehouses and wharves or the stables of the Afric Queen. They stood guard with them. They drilled with them. They practiced marksmanship very badly, Rab said. And now and then at the foot of the common, they executed a deserter with them. But never, not once, as far as Johnny could make out, did they ever leave them about. He can't find one of these British guns for Rab to have. Drilling, shooting, marching over, they stacked them at their barracks, and there was always at least a sergeant guarding these stacked guns. Johnny and Rab dropped their voices, even in the privacy of their attic, when they discussed these muskets. The Yankee gunsmiths were working from dawn to dusk preparing guns, making new ones, but as long as Rab had a weapon and was, after all, little more than a boy, he believed he had no chance for a modern gun unless he got it for himself from the British. "How soon," Johnny whispered, "before they march out and the war begins?" "God knows," Rab murmured. "God and General Gage. Maybe not until next spring. Armies always move in the spring, but before then I must have a good gun in my hands. A man can stand up to anything with a good weapon in his hands. Without it, he's but a dumb beast." Johnny had never seen Rab so blocked by anything. Apparently, he went through every situation without friction, like a knife going through cheese. Now he was blocked, and it made him restless, possibly less canny. One day he told Johnny that he had a contract with a farmer from Medway who was making a business of buying muskets from the British privates and selling them to Minutemen. Rab did not like to ask his aunt for so large a sum. She had little enough to buy food, but she had said weapons before food. One morning Johnny knew Rab was meeting the farmer at Marker. He knew that the soldier, returning from guard duty, was going absent-mindedly to leave his musket in a pile of straw. It had all been worked out, but when he heard yells and shoots from the marketplace and the rattle of British drums calling up reserves, he tore over to Dock Square. He had a feeling that the turmoil was over Rab's gun. He was right. A solid block of redcoats faced out, presenting their muskets at the market people and inhabitants. Okay, they're showing their muskets. The captain was yelling to his churning hundreds, "Get back! Stand back, good people of Boston! This is our own private affair." "What's happened?" Johnny asked an old henwife. "They've caught one of their own men selling a musket to a farmer. Happens he comes from Medway? So 'tis said. Happens they caught more than the farmer and the soldier? They caught 3 in all. They're taking them over to the province house for General Gage. Gage is in Salem. For some colonel, then. So he's thinking Rob got picked up with the farmer and the guy selling the gun." No mob gathered to rescue the 2 Yankees. All by now felt a certain confidence in the British way of doing things. A general or his own colonel had the right to punish a soldier caught selling his arms, and also anyone who tempted him. Johnny tagged the marching soldiers, but it was not until they turned into a province house that he saw the 3 prisoners. The British soldier was grinning, and Johnny guessed that he had been put up to this game merely to snare the yokels. So the soldier was not going to sell his gun. It was a trick to get the farmer and whoever was going to buy the gun, and it looks like it might be Rab. The farmer was in his market smock. He had long, straight gray hair and a thin, mean mouth. You could tell by looking at him he had gone into this little business for the love of money, not for the love of freedom. Rab had been shaken out of his usual nice balance between quick action and caution by his passionate desire for a good gun. Otherwise he would not have mixed himself up with such a man. Rab himself was looking a little sullen. He was not used to defeat. What would they do to him? They might imprison him. They might flog him. Worst of all, they might turn him over to some tough top sergeant to be taught a lesson. This informal punishment would doubtless be the worst. The province house was a beautiful building, and as Johnny hung around the front of it, he had a chance to admire it for over an hour. It stood well back from the rattle and bustle of Marlborough Street, with its glassy-eyed copper Indian on top of the cupola, and its carved and colored lion and unicorn of Britain over the door. Behind the house he heard orders called, and soldiers were hallooing. But worst of all, they were laughing. And that was Colonel Nesbitt's boy bringing about the colonel's charger. There was would that be a dove? Colonel Nesbitt's boy bringing about the colonel's charger. There was bringing the horse around. There was a large group of people still standing in the street. The hilarity of the British soldiers did not ease their fears as to the fate of the prisoners. Johnny could hear the rattle of the men's muskets as they came to attention, and then altogether 4 drummers let their sticks fall as one. Out onto Marlborough Street, with the drummers in black bearskin caps first, and then Colonel Nesbitt on horseback, came almost the entire 47th Regiment, surrounding a cart. In the cart sat a hideous black bird, big as a man, shaped like a man, with heads hung forward like a molting crow. It was a naked man, painted with tar and rolled in feathers. 3 times the Whigs had tarred and feathered enemies and carted them through the streets of Boston. Now it was the British turn. The redcoats marched. The colonel's horse pranced. The cart, with its shameful burden, bumped over the cobbles. One glance had convinced Johnny this was not Rab. The hideous blackbird had a paunch. Rab had none. So he sees the guy who's a prisoner, and he's been tarred and feathered, but it's not Rab, because he doesn't have a belly. Rab is skinnier. Before the townhouse, Colonel Nesbitt ordered a halt, and an orderly came forward to read a proclamation. It merely explained what was being done and why, and threatened like treatment to the next buyer of stolen weapons. Then, Colonel Nesbitt was evidently a newspaper reader. The regiment went to Marshall Lane and stopped before the office of the Spy. The threat was made that the editor of that paper would soon be treated like the bird in the cart. Then they were heading for Eads and Gill's office. Johnny guessed the Observer would come next, after the Boston Gazette, and ran to Salt Lane to warn Uncle Lorne. He jumped into the shop, slamming the door after him, looking wildly about for the printer. Rab, in his printer's apron, was standing at his bench, quietly setting type. "Rab, how'd you do it? How'd you get away?" Rab's eyes glinted. In spite of his great air of calm, he was angry. "Colonel Nesbitt said I was just a child. Go buy a popgun, boy," he said. "They flung me out of the back door, told me to go home." Then Johnny laughed. He couldn't help it. Rab had always, as far as Johnny knew, been treated as a grown man, and always looked upon himself as such. "So all he did was hurt your feelings?" Rab grinned suddenly, but a little thinly. Johnny told of the tar and feathering of the farmer, and also that he expected to be, And Johnny told of the tar and feathering of the farmer, and also that he expected in a short time the 47th Regiment would come marching down Salt Lane and stop before the door to read the proclamation about tar and feathering seditious newspaper publishers. "And here they come, those dressed-up red monkeys, but they don't dare do anything but stop, read a proclamation, and move on." When this was over, and the troops moved on down the lane to Union, Johnny and Rab stood in the street and watched them. "Luckily," said Rab, "I didn't give my money in advance. I'll return it to Aunt Jennifer." But he still stood in the street, watching the stiff rhythm of the marching troops, the glitter of their guns and bayonets, the dazzle of the white and scarlet disappearing at the bottom of the lane. "They'll make good targets, all right," he said almost absent-mindedly. "Out in Lexington, they're telling us, pick off the officer first, then the sergeant. The white crosses on their chests are easy to sight on." His words frightened Johnny a little. Lieutenant Stranger, Sergeant Gale, Major Pitcairn. Johnny could not yet think of them as targets. Rab could. So Johnny has gotten to know some of these guys, and they're people he likes. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to finish 4, then we'll wrap this up. Back at the lighthouse were apple trees, now heavy with fruit. Johnny and Scylla sat together on a bench. He'd missed her that month. She'd been out in Milton. It was still summer, but everywhere you could smell and feel the coming of fall. It had been an interesting conversation. Madge had run off and married Sergeant Gale. Oh, Madge got married. and Ma had been so put to it to keep Mr. Tweedy in the family, she'd married him herself. What? 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 Aha! Mom married Mr. Tweedy. Oh my word! She was gonna get him to marry one of her daughters. She marries him. Oh my word, I can't believe it. I did not see this coming, people. Whoa! Ha ha! Ha ha! She said he was too old for me, and she knows he's too young for her. But he's a clever smith, and she's going to hang on to him, come hell or high water. So at least she wasn't going to insist that Scylla marry him, but she thought, he knows what he's doing, I'll marry him. Oh my word! Scylla bent her face over the work in her lap. She was rolling a tiny hem on a tiny handkerchief, one of Miss Lavinia's. So she's Mrs. Tweedy now? Yes, Maria Tweedy. That's not so bad. You know you have to marry someone whose last name goes with your first. For instance, if my name was Rue, I couldn't marry a man named Barb. Rue Barb. Or if my name happened to be Tobacco, I couldn't marry a man called Pouch or Pipe or... Nobody was ever named Tobacco. You don't know. If a southern merchant made a lot of money on tobacco, I think he might name his daughter Tobacco. We made money on codfish around here, and I never heard of anyone calling his girl Codfish. You're just being silly. But I like to be silly. I like to plan things out, for instance. I couldn't marry a man called... Anybody called Priscilla can marry anybody. No, they can't. For instance, I couldn't marry Rab. Johnny froze. From being mildly irritated but interested, he was a little angry. Nobody asked you to, he said shortly. I know, but a girl has to think about things like that. Almost anything can happen to a girl suddenly, and she has to think, ahead, so she'll know which way to jump. Rab wouldn't marry you. He's too wonderful. Sully gave him one of her sweet, veiled glances over the corner of her eye. That's what you mean? It was exactly what Johnny had meant. Of course not, but he's not like any other boy I ever knew. Scylla did not look at the work in her idle fingers. She stared off down Beacon Hill from where they sat. From where they sat, they could see the ocean. I know that, but when you get to really know him, he doesn't seem so wonderful. I mean, he's just as wonderful, but a whole lot. He doesn't seem so wonderful. I mean, he's just as wonderful, but a whole lot nicer. Johnny did not want to ask the next question, but he could not help it. How'd you get to know him so well? She looked surprised. Why, he comes here and takes me walking and buys me sweets. And once he took me to the Old South to hear Dr. Warren. What? Rob has been taking her out on dates, people. I did not know this. Rob had never said anything about this to Johnny. It was well enough to say Rob was secretive by nature and couldn't help the way God had made him, but Johnny felt piqued. Scylla noticed the shadow on his face. Priscilla Silsby is poor, but Scylla Silsby is worse. Priscilla Silsby is poor, but Scylla Silsby is worse. So what she's saying is, I can't marry a guy named Silsby because my name is Scylla. You can't go by Scylla Silsby or Priscilla Silsby. That just doesn't work. So she's kind of, okay. Johnny's lower lip stuck out. Seemingly without any action of the wind, his fair hair was rumpled all over his head. But Priscilla Tremain is a fine name, she went on. I've thought about that ever since you came to the shop and Mother told me I had to marry you. I was 11 then. Yeah, then they had both been 11. She a skinny little thing with a gentle face and disturbing tongue. Her clothes had always been too big for her because they were handed down from Dorcas. She'd had to pin her skirts tight about her waist to keep them on. Pretty and shabby and sweet and sour, Johnny had liked her right off. He had not thought much about what she looked like now, but he looked at her as she bent her face to her work. The little pointed chin settled into the fresh white ruffles about her throat. Somehow her hair was curly around the edges and straight everywhere else. She had a shallow little nose, and on the other side of the bridge lay those long lashes which could mock him as well as her tongue. And so pretty he could not believe it. He was accustomed to staring at Lavinia Light's famous beauty and to feel a pleasant tingle up and down his spine. And now it was Scylla Lapham. just good old Scylla that was giving him spinal creeps. Ha 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 ha! He's starting to like her. I mean, well, he always has, but now he's realizing she's pretty. I kind of like this girl. When he was 11, he had said that he would marry her, if he had to. And then when he was 14, he had said he wouldn't take her on a gold platter. He was 15 now, and soon he would be a grown-up man going courting like Rab. Scylla was packing up her sewing. Miss Lavinia will be wanting her tea, and I must get Isana dressed, brushed, powdered, and perfumed to sit her with her. Isn't that weird? You have tea, and Isana has to get all primped up to just sit and have a cup of tea. This is crazy. One of the soldiers of the 4th Regiment who were encamped upon the common was earning a little money helping at the light stable. As Scylla moved away from Johnny, the groom leapt forward to open the kitchen door for her. Why, that mannered monkey, bowing and flunkying about because of just Scylla Lapham, that red-headed parrot couldn't even talk English right. But he'd known what Johnny had not. Scylla was a grown-up young lady, and she was pretty. "Scylla," Johnny yelled at her, "come back a moment, please." She left the groom bowing and smirking. "Yes," she said, standing before Johnny under the apple tree. "Look here, what's that fellow's name?" "Pumpkin." "That's not a name." "Yes, it is. It's his." No girl could ever be a Mrs. Pumpkin." "Nobody ever." There was a long pause. Johnny's next words sounded awkward. "You were right about one thing. Priscilla Tremain. That's a fine name." He'd meant it to be a joke, but as the words left his mouth, it was not. They both stood, embarrassed, looking at their feet. Scylla did not answer, but she reached up through the foliage of the tree and picked a little green apple. She gave it to him. "I didn't even know winter apples are still so green," she said, and walked off toward the house without a glance for the admiring Pumpkin. Johnny put the apple in his pocket. He'd keep it forever. It meant that Scylla really thought Tremain was a fine name. No, you can't even keep little green apples forever. It would wizen up or grow ripe or it might rot. Human relations never seem to stand completely still. This apple, for instance, it might ripen into something better than it was now, or unromantically, it might rot away in his pocket. He put it on the windowsill of the little superstitiously waited to see what it would do. But Rab ate the apple. Ha ha ha! There's a picture there. He's like in Scylla, but what if Rab steps in and sort of takes Scylla? Could that happen? I don't know. Johnny, already jealous, for the first time in his life over Rab's taking Scylla out, buying her sweets, and never saying anything, tried his best to quarrel with the puzzled Rab over his apple. It ended as Johnny might have guessed it would. Rab refused to be impressed with his crime. All he had done was eat a wormy, no-good apple. He'd give Johnny a peck of better ones, just so you'll stop glaring at me. Was it really wormy, Rab? It was. He had been a fool to think of the apple as a symbol of himself and Scylla. No, he's not a fool, people. I think there's something very, very good there. I like it. Okie doke, people, we're on to page 204. All right. You guys have a good one, and we will talk again. Thanks, you guys. Bye-bye.